you hear of the coffee marathon?
Ah, yes. This thing happened when we were away.
Yeah.
And I saw an invitation to it, and I came back.
Did you hear what you called it? This thing. I have not said
I don't know what it was, but the interesting thing was that it somehow got organised, and I saw the invitation when I came back from the London Coffee Fest, and it was a big deal, I think, but I'm not sure who went to it.
What is true is that the space called work has become a place of community. People know each other more in the workplace than they know each other in their families.
Yes.
So Ian, it's possible, and these are really the conversations your generation must think about.
The African ways for Africa actually are the best. And one of the big issues we have here is this crossroads that Africa has found itself in, whereby we have these Western ways coming in, traditional ways coming in. There's a mix up and confusion. If I go back to my days treating HIV, okay, but we're going back to the late 80s and the 90s, all through the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s. The issue was this whole confusion of modernism, or whatever was coming from the West, and traditionalism, because wars disrupt things, and of course there was wars going on in the region. There have been civil wars here as well. And then modernity, as in stuff that is picked up because of media, because everybody had radios and TV, because the world is more connected now.
Governance has complicated it. Today, you made the point about the impact of wars on the breakdown of our societies. There is absolutely no doubt that the gun, especially for Uganda, the ways in which we are a country that has gone through so much turbulence, east, west, north, and south, that definitely affects. We have not only the epidemic, we have entire communities whose fathers were wiped out because of war.
Welcome to yet another episode of the Two Sages podcast. We are here to have great conversations about everything in life, and today we have another great conversation with the Two Sages. Ian and Zach, welcome back to episode 3. 3 is a lucky number, so I think this episode will be a lucky one. I'd love us to start with highlight from what you've experienced since last time or over the last week.
I think Ian has had a fun life, so.
No, Jack, you've been the man who's been busy since the last time.
Let him be the first
You
to
go
ahead.
No, I traveled. Seeing friends has been awesome, both in the UK and in the US over the last actually 1.5 months. I had an amazing trip to Ethiopia as well, which was phenomenal.
You told us about that the last time.
Oh, is that? Was that before? Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
You
we
know,
spoke
after
about
that
that
attack,
last
I have
time.
short-term memory issues.
Yeah, I know. It's a problem.
So I need help. So no, it was great. That was awesome. To see friends, and these are life friends. These are people that I have known for decades. So it's really one of the blessings in my life. Gifts that is precious, that is priceless, are friends across the cultures. People who and we've known each other for decades. They've seen me grow, I have seen them grow. So it was great to have times with them. So that is really the highlight. But the other is a low light, and I'm sorry, I can't speak about highlight without a low light. But the happenings in the region, in Uganda, in East Africa. I was saying to Ian as we walked in that unfortunately, when I travel out of the country, the Uganda is in my heart, it's in my veins. The region is, Africa is, and I can't sleep without without it, it sleeps in my mind. I sleep in it, even when I'm sleeping in a different country. And so I've really, unfortunately, I've generally been sad, actually. I've just actually been sad. I've had very low moments, and because of the happenings in the country. So yeah, highlight friends, and yeah, and those in the moments when I was just staring in the sky and not sure, friends, say, hey, Zach, come on. So
Friends. Oh, that is a key thing for today's discussion. Yes, Ian.
I think between the last time I think I went to the London Coffee Fest, my current iteration as a coffee farmer means that I'm very much in the coffee world, and an organisation called the United Kingdom International Trade Centre, it was essentially through the British High Commission in Uganda, sponsored a bunch of coffee people to go to the London Coffee Festival and have a Uganda stand, for branding Uganda coffee. It was a very encouraging time because the British are fostering bilateral relationships, trade relationships between other countries now since they came out of the European Union. So that has worked in the favour of Uganda. And there's quite a lot of Ugandan coffee goes into Britain. So it was interesting because I've been in Copenhagen last year. I was at a coffee festival where there was a stand by the UCDA, that's the Uganda Coffee Development Authority, which was abolished by the president. And it was interesting to me the difference in the energy and the professionalism between this time, where it was a essentially private sector. I'm chairman of the Uganda Large-Scale Coffee Farmers Association. So we worked with this organisation, the UKITC, to involve a lot of people from the private sector in the coffee. So there was farmers, there was cooperatives, there were producers, there were people who roast, there were people who were trading in coffee. Interestingly, it was a lot of young people. I mean, I was definitely the oldest person there, and if you look, the average age there was a lot of guys in their 20s in the coffee industry, and the energy that was there was totally different from when it was a sort of a UCDA program thing. Yeah. Because honestly, when we do anything that's government, what you get is the thing's set up, then people go and then they sit there and then they're on their phones and they don't really have skin in the game. And they're not bad people or anything, but you don't get, when you send people who have something to gain or lose by being at such a show they can sell more coffee, then you really get so it was totally different energy, and it was encouraging. They had an event one evening and they asked me to speak at it, and I think I was energized and I was speaking about what selling coffee can do for the rural communities in terms of increasing household incomes and to bring education, to bring some cash in the pocket and to develop the rural poor. So I think that was my highlight. Otherwise.
Did you hear of the coffee marathon?
Yes. This thing happened when we were away. Yeah. And I saw an invitation to it and I came back.
Did you hear what you called it? This thing. I have not said
I don't know what it was, but the interesting thing was that it somehow got organized, and I saw the invitation when I came back from the London Coffee Fest, and it was a big deal, I think, but I'm not sure who went to it.
Okay, so the private sector was out of the country.
Please don't get us there. Let's just talk about our things.
So that's great. While Ian was talking about the private sector at an event, I've just remembered I attended an event recently. It was of private sector people. I've started out my work from government and NGO, so I intentionally went to this event because I wanted to learn what they're doing, and the vibe was different too. And one thing I noticed, I told my friend that I invited, is it seems here almost people speak and they mean every word that they are saying.
That's
I
funny.
don't know.
That's funny.
You-
You mean
you-
instead
have
of
you been
people
in-
saying the right things that they know are supposed to be said, but then you just wonder what's behind it?
Yeah, I don't know if
Makes
you've
sense.
heard people speak, but when you know, like, I don't think like, someone can speak for 5 minutes and they mean nothing. Yeah, but this event, it was still it's expatriates mostly. It was open to everyone.
What was it?
But it was organized by the Netherlands Uganda trade
Oh,
platform, with the British Chamber of Commerce, the Belgium Business Club, and all these guys. So it was open. Surprised there were no young Ugandans, but the topic was just teaching about how to grow money in this economy. So
I think
It
the word
was-
you're looking for is authentic.
okay,
Yeah, you know, when you're somebody's, they are themselves. They're not trying to please somebody else. They're just.
but yeah, that's something that came to my mind. And we are organizing an event, and someone asked me, they're going to put together an ad for the event, and they asked me, why would you come for this event? Why do you go for events? I told them, I go for events because I think there are people out there who know things I don't know, or who can open me up to a whole different world. And it was a paid event. It was 100K, but I went. I know it's like
You paid your money.
yeah, but I negotiated. I'm good at negotiating. So,
You said I'm only young. I can only afford 50.
but I did. Anyways, so that brings me to our conversation today, people. As I think, like, out there, you get to meet people. Zach was meeting friends, and me going for events is mostly to get to open up my world through people, and even in reading books, in a way, they are opening me up to other people's lives. So today I'm going to start with a quote from one of the books that has been read the most in Africa, Things Fall Apart. Unfortunately, many are falling apart. So Chinua Achebe wrote, "A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together in the moonlight village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so." Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. And the second one is by one of my best authors, Yuval Noah. He writes it in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and he touches very pertinent topics about the future. And one of them is human connection. And he wrote saying, "We are more connected than ever before, and yet more isolated. Technology enables us to reach anyone, anywhere, but it also makes it easier to avoid real human contact. Loneliness is becoming a major epidemic." So these quotes I've read on the background that for humans, our greatest uniqueness is not just our intelligence or our ability to think, but it's our ability to connect and network and organize ourselves in complex ways and support each other and build communities. And in addition to that, I've read somewhere that it is through conversation that we organize our minds. Obviously, writing is the highest form of organizing your mind, but conversations are what happens the most through talking to people. And so people who don't talk to each other don't get a good opportunity to organize their minds. But also, many people, when you ask them what's the most important thing in your life, they will say family. But we are seeing that there are changes in how life is for families, for people and friends, the loneliness epidemic that people talk about. And recently, there was a social media craze on X where young people were sharing screenshots of what their exes did to them. And there's these mean things, yeah? Things like I don't remember, but they're really mean texts. And I told my friends, I think this is clout. No one would ever say this. And my friends was like, you are joking. There are people are desperate for love. People are desperate to belong. Maybe because it has come easy for you, you think people won't do that. But I don't know whether it was true. I still think there's some fiction there. But there is a problem in our generation in terms of connection. So I want to get your words on this. How has it changed from the times you have seen what has happened, and what is the problem or the solution, or what is it? So I think Zach has fired up for us.
You're setting me up. And I guess let me first engage a little bit with you in your framing. Because as you know, we each frame understanding, make meaning from perspective. So I was curious that you prefer therefore the word connect, in spite of the quote that you gave, that we are more connected and yet more isolated. So we surely can't be looking for more connection. So the word I offer is commune. Commune, which is about...
It's because he's a cleric.
No. Actually, the word commune is not religious.
It's not. It's a word that's used a lot by religious people.
Yeah. But I think we need to, because you see, the quote he gave us, it acknowledges we are more connected. The world is more connected than ever before. People are more connected, but yet more isolated. And I think it's the reason for using the word commune. And we can actually find, if there is a better word that would connect with any who is not religious or anything, I'm happy for it. But I think it's to do with the whole question you raised about community. Feeling in a way in which we are feeling each other. We are understanding each other. We are empathizing. I think it's the word commune has a lot to do with empathy. It has a lot to do with ability to listen, ability to therefore get into each other's shoes. So anyway, that's the first thing I wanted to say, is that I think we are therefore speaking about something much deeper than connect. Because we are seeking, as you have highlighted, what it means to be human, what it means to really thrive. The word I like these two words, thrive or flourish. What does it mean to flourish as human beings? And I think that the point you make. Secondly, the changes that are evident. I grew up rural. And to give you a sense of how rural I grew up for the first 2 decades of my life, the first time I ever saw electric light, like switch on a bulb, switch on a system, was when I was actually, this is 1970, so I was 16 years. My first pair of shoes was when I was 18, my own. Those days you were even allowed to be in secondary school without shoes. I was in Tare school, and it's supposed to have been an elite school, but no way. There were those of us who came from rural, and my world was literally Bufumbira. It stopped with the mountains. So how much I knew. And I think I would say that typically the majority of Ugandans 60 years ago would have been completely and totally rural, unconnected. I grew up in the time when a car passed by, we the kids ran to cars was a fascination. So that's 60 years ago. I'm now 71. And it's massively changed. We totally have entered the modern world in ways in which there are more cars. I've seen the internet during this period. I grew up without a computer, I grew up without a phone, landline. So I think that there is a way in which technology, the technological developments, have reshaped the idea of how we sense and connect with each other, feel each other, talk with each other, the question of understanding, the question of feeling each other. So I think the whole technology and the shifts thereof have massively, whether it's in transportation. I mean, it used to take average 2 days to get into Kampala, 2 full days from my village. It would take 1 day to get from Kisoro to Mbarara and so on. So transport. And nobody should take credit for this. You know, I hear politicians taking credit over them. No, absolutely none. It's the waves of modernity. In fact, unfortunately for Uganda, we've not really modernized, embraced these technologies as I think we could have. So the first thing is the impact of technology, whether it's transport, whether it's telecommunications, and all that. And that has changed. I can tell you this, just to give you an example. My brother lost his daughter. His daughter died. And my brother was studying here he was studying at the theological college in Mukono. And he got to know about the death of his daughter. I suspect it must have been 2 days after the daughter died, because it needed somebody to travel from Kisoro to bring the message. That's how different it is. So communication has literally.
Let me come in there actually first of all on the connection thing, which I think you highlighted. And one of the things I think now about the type of connection that people have over the internet on social media is it's a connection that allows the worst of humanity to come out. Because I often feel that I know people will say stuff on the internet that they would not say to your face. You know, so the connection that we got is not only when you say, to commune or to have empathy, but this connection we've got actually it brings out the vitriol, it brings out the poison, it brings out the worst in human beings, which is really terrible because it's, there's so much of it. So it's not only a lack of the connection that you're speaking of in terms of empathy and communing, or, as, the kinsmen standing together, it is also making human beings something that I don't think they are naturally, but it's easy to just spit out stuff. So, that I think there's a lot of negative stuff that's been brought through all the social media. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's idea of that he's creating, communities throughout the world. What sort of a community is that? Anyway, the other thing I just want to add on to what you're saying in comparison to where I grew up. I grew up rural in Ireland as well. I grew up on a farm, and yes, the infrastructure was better. We had electricity, but I remember black and white TV and that kind of thing. What I do remember is being a rural farm boy, that it was lonely. You didn't have, in order to make connection, you had to make the effort. I had to go on my bicycle to meet my friends, and so it was. So there was probably similarities between. It wasn't as far away as Kisoro. It didn't take 2 days to get messages, but it was still a rural community where you were much more on your own. You had to invent stuff to do yourself.
But I think, Ian, your rural would be therefore different from my rural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because my rural, we were so totally interdependent, not only with the neighbors. If you didn't have salt, you just walk to your neighbor and say, I don't have salt. If you didn't have water, and you went to fetch water together. We always would go to the well together as a team and so on. And I think that, yes, the disconnect in terms of what technology did was have an impact on distance. So Kampala, Mukono is much closer today than Kisoro. But unfortunately, I think the point is, in spite of that distance being narrowed, I do not think that the human connection is at
It's
a
any
better
better,
level.
yeah,
Has
no, that's right.
improved community. It has.
No, for
I
sure.
don't think it has infrastructure, technology, and so on. We can have this conversation. To what extent has technology, whether in Ireland or in Uganda, has actually improved human flourishing? That is, ways in which we have empathy, ways in which we understand, we listen. Okay, we speak English and we talk to each other, but I don't know that we understand each other. I think that there is a way in which English language, modern languages have enabled talking to each other, but I don't know that we listen to each other. There are more vicious conflicts between societies than before. So I think it's a conversation on what modernity, and by modernity I think I'm thinking about technology, whether it's in transport, ways that enable us to reach each other. One other thing I think I would like us to include in this conversation is the impact on the concept of space. Space. Space and place. So I think the earlier one was on place, distance. Now it's space. One of the two primary ways in which rural communities, and it is evident to some degree, but I've seen it change, rural communities deeply connected were around three things, integrated though. One was marriage. The second was deaths. So both marriage and deaths, these were massive. People were together. It's like time stopped.
They're big events.
But the other are, quote unquote, what you might call religious events, whether the religion is the traditional religion or whether the religion is Christianity. I can still remember how the period between a few days before Christmas, which was preparation, to literally a few days after New Year, life stopped. In a sense, time stopped, and all you simply did, I remember in my village, was move from one house, we would move from uncle to uncle, simply eating and drinking together. And of course, my father's house was one of those, and we had to prepare for it. So this is a kind of a religious festival period. So the ways in which church was done. So I think that I have seen in your generation, and it'd be interesting to hear, when my children were going to get married, one or two of them, I will not mention their names because I have not asked them for permission. No. One of them simply said, I want a small wedding. I want few. And I said to her, but what do you mean? What do you mean I want a small wedding? How is that even conceivable? What do you mean? This is a time when we all gather. And you notice, we are challenged over the whole process. I hear people crying over the time lost over funeral processes. And they are counting it in terms of money lost. Yes, money is lost, but human beings are better off when they grieve and mourn together. So part of the loneliness, which would therefore be, I think that this loneliness we speak about has a lot to do with space. Spaces in which this community is evident, is embodied.
So I'll take you up on two things there. One, I think your observations about people coming together for religious festivals, coming together for family events and so on, that's so evident. In modern day Uganda, that is still the case. They're big events, and that's how it brings people together. Although I would feel that with funerals, because we used to have a lot, the Irish wake was quite, we would come together to celebrate and to drink and to sing and whatever. In Ireland, when somebody died, but funerals have now become something that you need to be seen at. So people go to funerals now not because of that sense of community in the village, but because when someone dies in a ministry, the whole ministry stops and everybody trails off to the village. And I don't see meaning in that. I understand the roots of it, but I don't see the meaning in it in present day. Yeah.
So
When
you
say
see,
it disrupts work, it disrupts
yeah,
everything.
it does.
Yeah.
But you see, that's the challenge. Honestly, people spend the best of their life in an office. You go to work at 8, You leave home. Now in this Kampala, you must leave home at about 5:36 to beat traffic. You get back home. So what is true is that the space called work has become a place of community. People know each other more in the workplace than they know each other in their families.
Yes.
So Ian, it's possible, and these are really the conversations your generation must think about, is how has the workspace, what has it become for community? Is there now work communities? I notice, even at weddings, Ian, your generation that engages, you now these days, the children want to be sure that they have more friends at their weddings.
Of course.
And where do these friends come from? They come from work,
Yes.
they come from school.
Yeah.
So there is a way in which villages as spaces for community, schools as spaces for community, work as spaces for community, churches, religious spaces as spaces for community. I think that that's the thing that has changed. And I think I don't know whether we've thought enough,
This is the
my
modern
generation,
world.
about, it's a confusing modern world,
This
Ian,
is the modern world. I mean, when you're talking
Yes.
about communities, you'll hear, if you listen to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, talking about community and so on. I mean, we talk about the international community and what on earth is that? But in I didn't say modern countries, but countries like Britain, where they have got various communities, they have the Pakistani community, certain areas where we stayed in London and Whitechapel is very Muslim community, and you go somewhere else, it's totally white. And they've got all these communities, and you talk about work communities as well, and it's trying to knit those communities together to have a sense of identity and nationalism together, but have a sense of community, because community is when community, the sense of community falls apart, lots of things fall apart.
So I guess that's why I was going, Ian, to say that the workplace has become space for meaningful identity. And that is why, therefore, when I lose a loved one from my workplace, the people who feel with me more and I feel with them is not the relatives in the villages, it is my work community.
So you're saying it's okay that the
absolutely.
whole
No, absolutely. I am one of those people
Yeah.
that will argue that one of the problems with workspaces on the continent, for Africans, is we've adopted a way of thinking about the workspace and have not thought about workspace as places of community. And I think we need to, so that we create allowance. Because this idea that you must make more money, I think that this idea that money trumps the sense of community is something that we must question. I think it's part of the reason.
No, but the two things flow together, Zach. When you're making money and you don't have a sense of community, then you try to bring community together because you realize you don't have shared values and things are not moving. But if you have such a sense of community that you can't work and make money and make a decent living, things also
And
fall apart.
I'm therefore suggesting that's the hard work we haven't done. I object to the idea that the office must continue to act the same way when one of their members has lost a loved one. And I think we need to be able to find allowances in which that can happen. The problem is we adopted ways. You've described the British ways, the Western ways. I actually don't. I don't even know.
You're being very negative on these Western ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to say that they are, to the extent of the way they have affected, and it's not because they don't work there.
Yeah.
I'm simply saying we, Zach Niringier, from rural Uganda, look, in the last 60 years, the transitions in my life, the disruptions in my life, you grew up watching television, okay? You had black and white.
Yep.
Brother, I didn't own a television until I was 30-something years. The point I'm simply making is that what has happened to us, what has happened to us is Western ways. I don't call them modern. Okay. I reject that. Western ways, they are Western modern ways, have come to us. They've taken over our lives. and have caused the disruptions that have made meaningful, if I am going to use the word connection, meaningful connection,
All right.
which enables human flourishing.
I-
It's really had an
I
impact on that.
agree that the African traditions, the African ways for Africa actually are the best. And one of the big issues we have here is this crossroads that Africa has found itself in, whereby we have these Western ways coming in, traditional ways coming in. There's a mix up and confusion. If I go back to my days treating HIV, okay, so we're going back to the late 80s and the 90s, all through the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s. The issue was this whole confusion of modernism or whatever was coming from the West and traditionalism, because wars disrupt things, and of course there was wars going on in the region. There have been civil wars here as well. And then modernity, as in stuff that is picked up because of media, because everybody had radios and TV, because the world is more connected now, whether we like it or not. And so you find that where there was a stable traditional society, where a man had his, I actually visited one of my health workers, and he said, this was late 80s, yeah. And he said, this is my, compound, and this is house number one, hut number one, this is wife number one, this is wife number two. And the guy was living, and that wasn't so long ago, but he was living, in a traditionally polygamous relationships with his wives, but it was stable. But this thing where, the church came in and said, now you've got to be monogamous. And so things became unstable, and people began to have relationships then that were unofficial, and the sexual networking became very complicated, and AIDS just ate up the whole place. But there had been a stable basis before that. Do you get what I'm saying?
So we are really on the same page on this.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I falter my generation. Because we are the first generation to imbibe in totality Western lifestyles. Again, I'm very clear, and that's okay, we can disagree on this. I will not call them modern, I call them Western.
It's okay.
And the reason I say that is because there is the word modern is used pejoratively against traditional societies.
Okay.
And to suggest that modern is better than, primal ways of
different.
living. That's the point. So, and that's why I don't even like the word developed, developing, and so on. Because of the point you're making, you have more phones, but you are less, you are worse human beings. Phones are bringing out the worst out of us in the way in which you've just described social media. So I think I falter our imbibing these ways, Western ways, and its leadership without reflecting on how then do we marry these? How does this interplay happen? I have seen other societies that seem to have done it better and are less fractured than Ugandans. I mean, I don't know enough to speak about them. They should speak for themselves. But I have a sense that Asian communities, South Asian communities, I have sensed as I was in, seem to have, but the point that has not happened here. So, for example, church comes and one man, one wife, all right? And in the initial period, there was a conversation on what does family look like in this new religion called Christianity? What does family look like? And we were told that is what the Bible says. But what we were never helped to understand is that when anybody says the Bible says, they are really simply saying, this is how I read the Bible. And therefore, we the Africans, Ugandans, we in our traditional primal ways, we were not given the space. I studied theology. The tragedy is I did not seek to understand how do we as Africans read these very scriptures. We imbibe the Western ways of reading the scriptures, not our own ways. We imbibe the Western education without asking how does that connect with our own education system. Because the Westerners told us we had no education system. Total rubbish. We had an education system. But we, the leaders, are the ones who said, yes, we agree we had no education system. Yes, we agree all our ways were pagan. Yes, we agree burial ceremonies, the way we did them, were all evil. Yes, we agree. And I think that's the problem. And I think the challenge that this complexity of what technology and Western ways have done to us, it thrusts us now to ask, is there something we lost out? Is it redeemable?
Yeah. Well, it's a big conversation, this. And let me say, you're coming from a completely African point of view. I'm coming from a, if you like to call it, a Western point of view, but having lived in Africa a long time. And I think the challenge in terms of taking, every culture has good and bad in it. And if you take your traditional African culture, which you're more familiar with than I am, but I know something of it, there were parts of it that had good results, and there were parts of it that had bad results. What I was saying earlier is you might have had a polygamous society, but it was stable. People knew where they stood. The relationships were, there was a way of controlling the relationships. It didn't result in this chaos of sexual relations that caused the spread of HIV. So it was the clash between modern and traditional.
Western and traditional, but it's okay.
Western,
I
Western and
agree.
traditional that resulted in that. Now, when you look at a traditional society or any culture, no culture is all good or all bad. So it's more about saying how can you take the basis of where we come from and then have good results coming from that. Now, if you go back to the work illustration, you say, look, you're happy that the whole department shuts down because somebody's father died and everybody goes off to a funeral. Yes, I understand what you're saying. The community is there, they're supporting their friend whose father died. But none of them knew the father. But they knew the person whose relative died. Yeah?
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. I get that. However, what would be the results of that, in a production line, in a school, in a hospital, and so on, when everybody goes off? And I think, we need to get a compromise which says, let's take what we know worked here, and then we're taking the functional, and we're trying to get a good functional result. So because we can't continue to live in mud huts. You say that was the traditional society, but we need to bring the global economy. We're all subject to economic trends. We're trying to identify, or not identify, but deal with rural poverty. That's one of the things that I, is a passion for me to do something about that. So how do we take what is good, or what we see as good, productive, bringing good results from the traditional society, or maybe it even comes from the bad Western society, and we bring it, to have good results.
So I am actually not,
And that
I'm
involves
not
compromise.
assigning,
Yeah.
I'm not making judgment on Western societies. And I'm not making judgment on any superiority of African traditional societies. No. I'm simply saying that there is a way in which traditional societies worked. There is a way in which Western societies worked. I didn't live there. I mean, like you, I have lived in the West. I've studied in
You're
the
very
West.
cosmopolitan.
I speak English, and also I don't fully understand how that works. Like nobody can fully, I don't even understand my own people. But I think the challenge, the point I'm really raising is precisely what you're saying. I think differently though, because we assign value differently. Cultures assign value differently. Western education brought certain value. Western economies, Western structures of economy brought certain value. And I acknowledge it. I am simply suggesting that as one growing up with my father, who grew up very traditional, with the whole and everything that worked and didn't work, the challenge for us, the reason why we are such broken societies, the challenge why HIV and AIDS decimated us,
Terrible.
decimated us, was precisely the point you make, that we have this receiving of a Western culture, and it happened a lot more in areas that were very exposed to the Western, the urban areas and other areas that where the transportation system. I mean, I still can remember the epidemiology around the road networks, the
Yes,
trucks and so
very
on.
much.
And you can see that there
Transport
is the
networks, yeah.
transport network. And I think you can see a relationship between the Western ways of living and moving
Yeah.
that affected how this itself happened. And I think my plea, which is why this conversation is important, is to ask, we as Ugandans, and Ugandans are different societies because we are different culturally, but we are finding ourselves in Kampala together. And I think it's the leadership call to ask, what is it that we live with from our traditional societies? Everything is moving. What is it that we receive and welcome and accept? So back to the work environment. I am not suggesting that's a good thing that the entire office shuts down. But truth be told, there are no clear policies for the workplace that integrates this Western way of work and the African traditional way of work. Those policies don't exist because our leadership, we the leaders, have not provided for that. And Ian, as I say leadership, I say that within the leadership of the church. I say that within the political leadership. Let's add another element. Governance has complicated it. Today, you made the point about the impact of wars on the breakdown of our societies. There is absolutely no doubt that the gun, especially for Uganda, the ways in which we are a country that has gone through so much turbulence, east, west, north, and south, that definitely affects. We have not only the epidemic, we have entire communities whose fathers were wiped out because of war. The question of identity that you raise is very important. So, yes, have we asked ourselves how militarism affects how people connect with each other? So, all these are factors which I am simply saying a conversation like this is extremely important to say, what have we done with this? Why are we where we are? Why are we such a broken society? I mean, we were talking together earlier. Why is it that, if you don't mind, people are dying now, and we, as societies, we don't even know how to respond? I mean, one of the things that depressed me the last 2 months is, first of all, the ways in which these states in East Africa are torturing people. I mean, that was right, and they torture them in modern ways, you know. But secondly, we actually don't know how to support each other, grieve together, because essentially we don't have a society, we don't have communities. And I think this is a good moment to say, what has happened to us? And I think part of it is leadership. We, the leaders, have not done what we ought to have done.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I talk about a society that you're grieving over and a society that is actually fractured.
Yes.
Speaking of Uganda. And I think, you know, there's 3 or 4 deaths that have happened recently that have been, that have highlighted different reactions to death, you know, and the first one, of course, was Rajiv. And you know, I think I've known Sadir, we've known Sadir and his greater family actually for 35 years. And I've been involved in family occasions when his cousin died, when his uncle was really the patriarch of the family, and a beautiful old man actually. And so I've been there on many occasions when people were sick and so on. And on this occasion, I just come back into the country and I heard Rajiv had died, you know, in that sort of tragic firebomb. And we went along with my wife and to see his wife, Sudhir and his wife. And it was a tragic moment, you know, of personal grief, you know, to lose his firstborn son. And his wife was basically saying, all the millions, all the money they have, but, you know, what does it mean? And you have such an emphasis in Uganda on money. you have the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots feel like if we just had money, and that's why you get a lot of the thefts and the muggings and stuff going on, because people just do anything just to get their hands on a bit of money. And here is a family that had more money than they could ever spend, but losing their firstborn, grieving, in a way that's inconsolable, and then after that, the next week, we lost an old Irish lady who started hospice Africa, Uganda, and Merriman. And she was funny, actually, because it was almost that she was 90 years old, and she wanted to have her 90th birthday celebration. She had a mass. She'd actually called me the week before that and said she'd got a pain in her chest. And so I went along, not that I did much good, but I went along. I don't make very many house calls. If Zach calls me, I'll probably say, go and see, a proper doctor. Anyway, I went along and listened to her chest. There wasn't much I could
What
do.
did you just say? Okay, keep going.
So, and Anne was okay, but she was weak, she was approaching. That woman stayed around. It's almost like she made the decision, I will have my birthday mass, my birthday celebration. And after her birthday celebration, and I went to that as well, and we talked. Then Navigerica was there. And then she just slipped away. And when you read her life, she had such a meaningful life, long, meaningful life, not only starting hospice, but doing so many other things. At one stage, she was a nun, and then she left the order and she became a geriatrician. She introduced death with dignity, with oral morphine into Uganda. And she was a micromanager. I mean, she was quite annoying because she was still 90 and she was still organizing things, probably like me. Or he'll be really annoying when he's 90. And but a very, what I would say, timely death in the sense of, but because she had a very purposeful life, whereas Rajiv's death was very untimely. He died when he was 35 years old. And then we have had the death of Cedric, who's, I think, 49 or something like that. Cedric Babu. And that, you talk about your social media, has allowed people, when they made an appeal that they said he needed a heart transplant, and there was some vitriol. I didn't even read it, but, apparently it was there. Yes, there were people who were sympathetic, but there was an awful lot of people who were vitriolic on social media, on this thing that's supposed to connect us now, who presumably didn't even know Cedric, but because he represented the elite, because he represented a certain faction in politics, they were nasty. And then the guy died. And I was at the funeral just yesterday. Not the funeral, sorry, vigil yesterday. And there was a deep sense of loss from his friends. It was as if one of you guys had died here. Of course your friends are grieving. And because he was obviously, I knew him fairly well myself. He was a nice guy. But there was also a sense of the fragility of life and almost a sense of fear. In these folks who had gathered, who were, let's face it, the more the well-off, more the elite of Kampala. So I think these deaths are also through making people question, and they're questioning the fragility of life, and they're also questioning the stability of the society that they're in and what's the future. And I think that you're talking about leadership in terms of culture and so on. Leadership, of course, is very important, and we've had a leader who has been there for, it's coming up in 40 years, I think now, and who in many ways has been very good, and in other ways, the other day he was apologizing for his misdeeds or for, But anyway, I want to finish by you mentioned other societies that perhaps they have undergone the transition better, like Asian societies. Let's take Singapore. Singapore and Uganda were supposed to be at the same GDP in the 60s. Now Singapore is like one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Sorry, let me take Korea because I know it better than Singapore because it's similar. Korea, came from the Korean War, came from a rural economy, and has done that fantastic development. We see that from the outside. I know I think you know Kathy Koo. Kathy, brilliant young woman who started Spouts of Water here, who's a doctor, she's a business degree. She's just one of the most brilliant people I've known, and one of the most driven. And her comment about her own society was, yes, Koreans have really made changes, and if you read some of the books, they've changed literally from the village, like the Kasoro to the skyscrapers. Everybody has had to make that change. She said, yes, they've made the changes, but they're all miserable.
Yeah.
So
I think what I'm really, I think let's talk about death, and we need to be more comfortable to speak about death. Because actually, back to your question about human connection, I think death says a lot about our lives. Death is that moment that says a lot about our lives together. You make reference to those 3 deaths, and death is a deeply personal, but death is also a deeply community, because it's death that challenges community systems, structures. I mean, and it's all of them speak about the infrastructure. It talks about, they are all saying lots about our communities. We are no longer, Bafumbira, in Kisoro. Kisoro itself is no longer the same. It has Asian businessmen. It has always had them. So yes, but how have we dealt with these changes in the structures of our societies? And I guess my point is really this. Because we've not been intentional in reflecting on this. When the British colonized us, when the British brought Asian laborers on the East African Railway, when the Asians introduced the duka, the local shop in the area, the Asians became the first elite. It created tensions within our societies, Asian, African. Have we actually reflected deeply as societies on the management of that tension? My answer is no. And I think on both sides. The Europeans, some settled in Uganda. Kenya was a settler colony.
Kenya was much more colonized.
Yeah, settler colonies. It was a settler colony. And again, it's a completely different mix. And I can say to you, I have very close friends. I know Kenya enough to know that the settler economy is one of the enduring problems of today's Kenya because of the land question. And really, I guess what I'm saying is that as societies, we've not dealt with these things. And it comes to roost when death happens. It comes to roost when death happens. Because then the worst comes out and the best comes out. The worst comes out, the anger, the conflicts are visible. So the whole Asian-African divide is real. The whole political divide is not just politics. People think it's political parties. No, it's about access to medical care. You saw people were simply arguing around, what hospital do you go to? It's about the schools you go to. I had a young man, I'll not mention their name, whose father took them into international schools. And this young man, he is only about 19. He simply said to me, Bishop Zach, the international school has created a divide between me and my generation. I noticed that I can't hang around with kids of the same age who've gone to schools in Uganda. So we've created divides.
Why?
Why? Because the international school system is itself a bubble of its own.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'm asking, you've got a 19-year-old who says, I now can't relate to the guys who went to Ontario or who went to Budo or
actually, no. He might even relate to Ontario because Ontario and Budo look more like international schools.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
No, but I'm speaking about your USE schools. But even Ontario, I would let him. The point he was simply saying, I have less opportunities of engagement, but But secondly, it's a completely different economy. So,
Yeah, totally. But okay, I want to make
so
the point.
so the point I really just want to say is that all of these changes have come upon us.
Yeah.
There's nothing good or bad about them.
Yes.
It is simply that we have not managed them well. And the deaths are showing the ugly head of what we haven't dealt with.
Zach, I want to make one point. So it comes back to community, and you've brought it up because of schools. When somebody goes to an international schools like ISU, there's three or four of these expensive international schools. They then isolate themselves, or they become isolated from other friends who go to Budo or go to all the other Ugandan schools. Because when I go to a Ugandan function, you'll find that people, and this I suppose maybe the elite, okay, but they went to school together, or their relatives. It's like I stand outside. Part of the community, yes, very accepted in the community, but I didn't go to school with them, nor did I intermarry, and so there are things that bring communities together, and that is very much the school you went to, the
That is
person you
true.
married to, and those will stick.
But
with you.
those schools
create communities.
They not only create communities, they create divides.
Well, exactly, exactly.
And that's why I go back to us, the leaders. It's important that we address the divides that has come in our societies because of these changes.
Because
and
there'll
frankly,
always be divides in society.
there will be, but divides do not need to lead to conflict.
Yeah.
So it's about managing divides, but also making sure that divides do not fracture our societies. Because right now, the way we are, not only have we lost the human connection, our societies are so totally fractured, we actually have lost empathy.
But can I suggest to you that the divide in our society, while you have those small things, like what school you went to and who your tribe and who you're married to and all that, I believe that the big divide in our society is between the haves and the have-nots. Because this society where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer is always going to reach a point where it will explode. And when you look at the 44 to 48 million people we have in Uganda today, compared to 12 million when I first came here, you look at the strain on resources, and also you look at where the growth has been. It has been among the poor. It's not that we have pulled everybody up as we've all become middle class. And so I think that is the big fracture, and that becomes the elite against the rest. We see it every day, by the way. It is rubbed in our faces every day when another politician forces his way through the traffic with his VIP escort, okay, as you try to sit in your traffic lane. It just emphasizes privilege and the rest. And by the way, I'm a privileged person. I don't force my way through the traffic. But when that thing fractures and explodes, all of us will be caught in that. Anybody who is thought to be elite.
So I guess the difference I also would like to make is the divide and difference. Difference will always be there.
Yeah.
And I think we do not want people to look the same. People will not earn the same amount of money. But the question is about flourishing. How do people, where they are, how they are able to flourish? And we only flourish together. And I think one of the challenges, you talk about poverty. I mean, studies have been done. Ugandans are not poor because they are poor. Ugandans are poor because they have been impoverished. There are systems and processes in this country that ensure that the poor are kept poor. And we can get into a conversation around why that is the case. That's why we need to get into governance. And therefore, what has that done? It widens not just difference, but the divide, which therefore means you are creating extremes. And again, I think as a country or as a society, once you have extremes, unfortunately, as social media does, that time is going to come. Polarization. So this polarization, and again, for me, I hold it completely and squarely to leadership, whether it's political leadership, religious leadership, leadership in our social services. It's purely and politically leadership. I mean, yes, there was another death that happened actually. Irene Mulyangoja's husband, Justice Kakoza.
Oh, yeah.
And remember Justice Irene Mulyangoja going public about how Mulago is hopelessly incapable of managing simple processes. Again, it's back to the point you make. It's about access to social services. It's about, do I have money in my pocket to actually live a decent life in this country? And so I agree with you. At the bottom end, living together is at the end about what do we share? Do I have what I bring to the table in order to share? And I think we've created a society in which I agree this income inequality is widening. Therefore, access to services is widening. The millions and millions of kids who are going to UPE schools and who are going to USC schools that will never ever be able to enter the economy of this country. Those kids are going to live in this country. They're the ones who are going to burn Kampala, the skyscrapers. So again, I think absolutely right. Those things affect how we connect as human beings, because then those things make us look more like beasts rather than making us more human beings to relate to each other.
But I think there has to be a coming together. You say about leadership. Leadership is not easy for anyone leading anything. And that's where your authenticity comes in. And because leadership will bring out the substance of a person, not the image. We have too many people who lead by image in this country, not by substance. However, it's not just about leadership. There needs to be a coming together. You had an idea about elders, having elders, have an elders forum, that actually leads elders who have some wisdom. And I do think that to go to politics, when the movement started, it was called a movement. And I clearly remember living in Luero, because we were in the village, and Luero was where the fighting took place, and we had all the evidence of it there. I clearly remember that then the political teaching was, no, we are not going back to political parties, because the political parties was what resulted in the killing. Because if I was UPC and you were DP or whatever, that's what caused the killing. And coming from Ulster, we understood that. Or I understood that because it was a Catholic Protestant, it was a unionist. Politics and religion, politics, tribal politics, political systems. So they said, no, we're going to have just this movement. And in fact, things moved on well for the first decade, until the introduction of party politics, until the abolition of term limits, and then it became a very politicized country, which it still is today. And we lost the coming together to say, you come, let's discuss a point of view and let's move forward, which we had in the CA.
You see, I would argue, that everything you've described did not just happen. It's constructed. And I would go back to, because I think my understanding of leadership, Ian, is that leadership creates culture. Leadership constructs spaces. It's leaders who, whether it's in the village, and this is really the traditional model. In the traditional model, you had elders. Elders elders were custodians of the values, of the customs. They were the ones who regulated. So there was a leadership structure. And there were spaces in which leaders had to be. We had to enter the modern period, for example, of barrios. Local communities created barrio arrangements that committed everybody in the village to be part of the barrio society, barrio association. So in fact, I lived in Kampala, and my elder brother made sure that my family, as we grew older, everyone was registered, because it was very clear that if you don't register and you're not a member, when it's time, because we are all buried in the village, when it's time to bury you in the village, and we've experienced it, going to funerals, where people come from Kampala and they will not be buried by locals. So you talk about the viciousness of what happens at a burial. Check the villages. You know, the villages are very ruthless. My elder brother who passed, there was a threat that the village may not bury him if he didn't behave well, you know. So these tensions around burials are evidence of our connection. And
But you're
I'm
speaking of
simply
elders,
saying is that
yeah.
the elders as leaders,
Yeah.
so I agree with you, leaders by substance,
Yes.
leaders by what you hold and how you hold the society, by the spaces you construct, by the rhythms of a society, the rhythms of a community. That's the role of leaders. But and I agree, one of the things that has changed is what leadership really means. Today's leadership is about political positions, is about money, it's not about substance. And we need to really go back and say, this is what it ought to be. So I totally and completely disagree with analysts that argue that Uganda changed when political parties returned. Because first of all, as one who has studied this history, all this was constructed. It's a narrative that was constructed.
You may say
that was meant to be believed.
Yes, okay, that's a point of view. But I was living in Luero at
Just
that
as I was
time,
living in Kisoro, my
and it
brother.
worked. The system
And I
was
can tell
working.
you, it didn't work for us.
No, we're going back to the late 80s, early 90s. You
Absolutely.
said it didn't work for you.
It didn't.
To me, it
didn't.
worked.
It
To me,
fractured our societies. The NRM system
Yeah.
fractured our societies. So we can get into the discussion about these political systems of Uganda. And I think, however, yes, let's have a deep discussion as a country on what went wrong.
Exactly.
Because everything is wrong. So
That's-
what has gone wrong becomes a very
So
crucial conversation.
that's where I wanted to us to go towards as we conclude. It's that because human connection starts from how people identify themselves.
Yes.
Because we connected because there's something at the intersection in our lives. It's like if you're at an airport and you meet someone and they tell you they have been to Uganda, and then you tell them you're Ugandan, and now you have something in common with this stranger, and then you can end up having a conversation for hours. And at that point, they're seeing you as more like themselves, like you're common. But now we are seeing that, I'm thinking that the polarity or the way people end up working or stealing public funds is in the way they see themselves versus the other people.
So,
I don't know what you think about that.
you see, I think it was Andrew Mwenda who wrote a piece recently which said that under the current system, it has become every man for himself. And, you know, when you stop identifying, this is my community, you know, this is my nation, when it becomes, things are falling apart, you started from a quote from him, then it becomes every man for himself, and then that becomes very dangerous. And I think that's why we need to come back together again to see that, you know, when the tide comes in, all the boats rise in the harbour. And we need to see how can we be together to make this better society. But when you have you know, someone came to me day before yesterday, an aspiring politician, and he said because I had been mayor of McKinley, you know, he wanted to talk to me and that. What he really wanted was money. But I told him, currently, nobody trusts politicians. That person, any politician might be good-hearted and so on, but everybody in Uganda sees politicians as self-serving. And so that's a terrible basis for the people who are in Parliament, who are our leaders, that there is a complete lack of trust. And then he was also with the NRM in Kampala, in a position in Kampala. And I said, well, that's an uphill struggle as well, because again, the feelings in Kampala are deeply anti-government. So to try to prove that you're an MRN politician in Kampala and you are different and you are going to change the city and that's a big ask. And it's only the level let me say, the low level of achievement of the Kampala politicians, which has, you left saying, well, we say 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other, in terms of people are just apathetic. I wonder whether anybody will really get out and vote in the next election, especially in Kampala as it is. But
Yeah, I think that the question, Ian, you make a very key word there, trust. And I really appreciate the point you make about trust. So what's happened is there's no more trust. Whether the trust between those who hold political power positions, in other words, those who lead politically and those who don't. By the way, as a person within the churches, as a pastor, religious, there is also a breakdown of trust between, quote unquote, the ordained, the pastor, and the congregations, actually. There's a breakdown of trust. We don't trust our schools, to trust is a huge. And so the question you raise, what do we do to restore this human connection, this meaningful, I want to add, meaningful human connection? I think it's a question of how do we rebuild trust amongst us. And I would say that one of the things that has happened with the nature of our economies, the nature of this divide, is the devaluation of being human. And so I'd also add to say that that's a question of how do we reconnect as humans? The person you speak about on the plane, you are strangers together until you suddenly realize you're just simply both human beings. And I think it's that, how do we have a meaningful human connection? And that's a conversation we must have. So we are no longer labels, Catholics versus Protestants,
tribe,
Muslims against
political
these.
party.
You are not, and this language of Bachwezi, Batutsi, Banyankore, Northerners, and so on is not good language, because it's taking away the idea that we connect with each other as simply as humans. And therefore humans who need water, who need access to public goods and services, humans who breathe, who need, I think it's that's really how do we reconnect as human beings? Because one of the reasons that's really happening is we are treating each other like we are objects on sale. Look at what's happened to the younger generation. They are literally objects on sale to the highest bidder, whether it is in our education system, whether it's in the whole modern day slavery going all over today. So how do we reconnect as humans? I think is the question that you are asking. We must ask it as a society. And I think at the bottom end of it is, bottom line, how do we build trust? How do we trust each other as human beings? And I hope that the younger people can say that, because there's also a notion that young people connect as young people. The divide that is evident in our society is also evident among the generations, whether it's young people, whether it's women, whether it's men. I think it's the question you raise is very substantial.
I think on that note, that's a good note to finish. How do we connect? How do we trust? And how do we connect again?
Yeah.
And build community?
Meaningful human connection as a people.
I think this has been the first conversation where I don't even have to interrupt you. I think the conversation on connection and in humanity and how we look at each other is very deep and sensitive, because I think it's all that there is. It bleeds into everything. And I hope that the people that have watched get questions to ask themselves and think about these things and answer them and discuss them. And probably this will contribute towards the journey of healing our country.
I hope so.
I think the other thing I would say, which is valuable, is that Ian and I are different, completely different. All right? But we actually are the same as human beings. And my connection with Ian, we are both human beings. We are men. We have men conversations. We're different. But I think this connection as humans, and I think we need to encourage more conversations between different people.
Yeah.
Let's gather people in their difference. Let's have a conversation. We're not agreed on many things, but that's okay. That's what it should be. That's how we learn from
That's
each
how
other.
we learn. That's
You
how
know,
we learn.
and that's really has
grow.
been the depth of my friendship with you.
Yeah.
You know, we're learning from each other. We are arguing a lot of the time,
We are
but
arguing.
out of that, we are finding common ground. We are human beings. Hey,
Awesome. Great. It's been a great conversation. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Till next time.